Real talk, raw feelings. Welcome to Tuna Grades podcast series. If I'm being honest, I'm your host, Nishani Javadana. I'm the founder of Tuna Grade.
And I'm Himgori Alve. I'm the founder of Tessellations and a co-host on this journey with Nishani.
So today, our episode is going to be a continuation of our previous week's topic, which was the culture of coexisting. And during our recording of our last episode, we had, if you were paying attention to our listeners, we had dropped a couple of hints and a couple pointers about who we were going to invite so that we can continue this conversation. Because as it turns out, Gigi and I can talk for hours about culture.
Yes.
And we actually had to stop ourselves from continuing for hours. And then we realized, what would make this really special is if we invited somebody who can kind of bring an alternative perspective, a unique pair of eyes into this topic, since Gigi and I come from the eastern part of the world, as you, our listeners, know really well, because we talk about it all the time, every single episode. And now I would like to introduce a featured guest. To be honest, he is our first guest in this episode series. And I believe I met our guest a couple of years ago in a professional networking group. Him and I, we were both business owners jumping into the world of networking. And we had a lot of professional collaborations, and then realized that we also are deep thinkers. We like to have very philosophical conversations about topics. We like to dive into the topic of what it means to be a human. And so I love to bring that exposure from his perspective, from his life. And for the record, he is somebody who's lived in North America, is born and raised in the United States, lived here, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, his whole life. Of course, he's traveled across the globe. And then over a year ago, our guest decided to permanently move out of the United States, out of North America, and move to a new country and settle down and restart and rebuild a community there, which we're going to get into as we give him an opportunity to introduce himself. So without further ado, I just wanted to say thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. Thank you for agreeing to join in on our random conversations about cultures of coexisting and just culture in general, because our little bubble that we're creating is also a culture of its own, the podcast culture, right? So thank you for being here, and allow me to introduce you guys to Dr. Zachary McKinley. Yay!
Certainly. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And of course, I'm honored to be the very first guest on what I think is going to be a very successful podcast. I think y'all are having some very valuable conversations that people need to hear. So I'm looking forward to seeing it grow. Hopefully this becomes one of those really important conversations. Because I think culture is something that is often misunderstood. And I think cultural understanding is something that's sadly quite lacking, especially in the West. It's lacking everywhere, but it's lacking in different ways. So I'd love to share a little bit about why I developed an interest in culture and how it's kind of my own life and my decisions. So I'd be happy to start wherever you guys would prefer.
Honestly, that was going to be my first question. And as we all know, you are a cultural researcher. How did you decide to pick that?
Definitely. So I guess I'll start at the beginning. It's a little bit of a longer story, but it's important. Some of the details are important. So I grew up in a Christian family in the U.S., was born and raised in Texas, spent a little bit of time in Michigan as well. So I got to travel at least a little bit within the U.S. and get exposure to different parts of U.S. subculture. But that being said, being in a Christian family, I was given the opportunity as I grew up to go on different mission trips to different parts of the world. Very simple trips. They're a very quick taste of different cultures, but they were no less impactful than what would be a more serious trip. Each trip seemed so potent in its effect especially when you're a kid and you go to a place like Mexico. Or Tanzania or Nepal and other places like that. They're very different. And coming from a U.S. perspective, you realize very quickly that the world is huge and people think and act and communicate and everything else very, very differently than we do in the U.S. So I'm grateful to have had some exposure to that. And I don't know that I really would have gone down the same path had I not had that exposure as a child. So regardless of whether or not someone is going on a mission trip or just traveling on vacation or some other type of philanthropic effort, I think it's very important for people when they're growing up to find, especially in the US, to find ways of travel. Because unfortunately, the US has people in the US are very unlikely to travel outside of the country. We have one of the lowest rates of active passports of any other country on earth, yet we have significant purchasing power and plenty of means to travel outside the country if we wanted to. But we're naturally very isolated. And it's not entirely a bad thing because there's plenty of great places to go in the US when you've got everything from the Grand Canyon to
Yeah.
the Rocky Mountains to Appalachia to the Florida Everglades. I mean, you've
That's
got
right.
more than enough in you for a lifetime. So I think that might be part of the reason people don't travel much outside the US.
For the record, like having a US passport gives you access to almost every other country on this planet. Like that passport, especially having transitioned from a Sri Lankan passport to an American passport, I felt like I could just, all the lines I would see people like gathered. I'm like, that used to be me holding up a gigantic folder of all of the times that I had visited and all of the things that I have done in the country to now just walking in just with a little teeny tiny book and just handing it over and getting it stamped. Sometimes not even getting it stamped because you could just walk in when you have a US for certain countries. So that definitely we're advocates for everybody. Everybody ought to consider. We're highly recommending get a passport, see what that feels like to just go somewhere new and get all those stamps, because that used to be the trend, right? You want to collect those stamps on your passport book. But with an American passport, sometimes you actually don't get that. You don't even have to get the stamp in order to enter a new space. So anyways, that's really cool, Dr. Zachary, that how I got you into this was your parents, their involvement in religion and Christianity, and how that, because when you said mission trips, I was intrigued because I don't think even I realized that that's one of the things that you had experienced as a child. When you say mission trips, do you mean like you guys travel somewhere new to a church community and then share your experiences, or you're sharing about Christianity when you travel to new places?
So it's a little bit of both, and that's also slightly a larger answer. I think that across the US, there's thousands of churches. It's one of the most Christian countries in the world, and for that reason, there's uh, lots of faith-based organizations that try to send people from the US to other countries, both to share the message of Christianity, and usually also in combination with some type of philanthropic effort.
Okay.
So there's a little bit of a debate about how beneficial those trips really are. Sometimes if you consider getting a group of 20 people from a church, everyone's spending several $1,000s to go to build a well in Africa that would cost less than $1,000 from start to finish if you were to just hire locals to do it.
Yeah.
And who are we to tell people there how to build a well? A little bit of debate regarding the utility of that. But without opening up that discussion, I would just say that at the very least, one of the greatest results of purposes for those types of trips are for the perspective shift in the people that it's some of the most life-changing opportunities to see different parts of the world, to experience different parts of culture. Many get a different type of philanthropy that they never otherwise would have been able to, and they go back to the US and ultimately wind up either changing their life's course by studying things they wouldn't have studied, contributing academically, or they start their own organization to go do something abroad, or they become lifelong donors. So there's plenty of positive externalities for participating in those types of trips. And for that reason, I'm very grateful to have been given the opportunity to do that. That was really the point of bringing that up, that it was my first exposure to other cultures. Certainly wouldn't go on to be my only exposure to other cultures, but I don't know if I had taken those opportunities or been given those opportunities if I would have, understood what I was missing out on and wanted to explore those further. So I guess that's a wonderful takeaway that everyone should get a passport. So if you're listening to this, at the very least, get a passport and find an excuse to travel. If not vacation, maybe with your church or with your a nonprofit organization. Or you're really, really brave, just do it. As Nishani said, the U.S. passport is relatively strong. It's not by any means the strongest, but it's certainly not the weakest either. You get a lot of good opportunity with the U.S. passport.
Yeah.
And plenty of countries will offer free 90-day automatic visas.
Yeah.
So you're really brave, get a passport, get a ticket somewhere you haven't been exposed to, and don't be too afraid of figuring things out along the way. Across the world, most places people are very kind to
Yes.
foreigners.
Yeah.
At least that's been my experiences. And as an American, there's often a little bit of intrigue because even in places that are highly traveled, where you have a lot of transient travelers from different parts of the world, Americans are still, or people from the U.S. rather, are still the minority. So there's often a lot of curiosity to find out about you and so forth. So
that is so true.
Definitely.
And so with that, I wanted to add, so I know because you studied culture, you're a cultural researcher, and you kind of delved into the book side of culture, right? Like understanding the terminology and what it means because there's a lived experience and then there's what's on books. And I believe a lot of people may have the privilege of experiencing both or just one or the other. I would say I have more of a lived experience in the world of culture. And I think I've found language through my lived experience. And that's one of the reasons why I thought having you on our show is going to be really, really important because you not only have studied it, but you also experienced it. So for our listeners, when I first met Dr. Zachary, he would travel to a new place at least once a year. And he would spend at least a month or I think a couple of months, or in the winter time, I think he would just leave the US or, Northern America and then go somewhere else and would kind of put himself in environments where he would just settle in. And I guess your business allowed you the option to work from anywhere, which is fantastic. And then, of course, I believe it was over a year ago when you finally decided, you know what, I'm not going to do the travel thing. I'm just going to stay where I've traveled to last because it's so amazing. So I want you to tell us about that, walk us through that experience and what it means for you to be a cultural researcher and how you are incorporating that into your life now.
Definitely. So we're going back to those experiences as I grew up. They were very impactful, of course, but I didn't have the whole picture, and there was plenty that I didn't understand when I would go to these other countries. But a pivotal moment for me came when I was in Haiti with an organization called Mission of Hope. I went there twice, once in high school for a week. I got to see the organization. And then a few years later, I went back as a summer intern. And that was my longest experience out of the US at the time. I was there for about 3 months. And during that time, I became aware that on the island of Haiti, there were over 5,000 non-government organizations, nonprofit organizations.
Wow.
Yet it still remained one of the most impoverished countries in the Western Hemisphere. And it hinted at a very significant problem that you could have the best intentions with what you want to do, but if you don't understand culture, you can wind up causing more harm than good. And I saw that play out the entire summer.
Wow.
There's an expression there called Mwe Haitian. It just means I'm Haitian. But it's the words themselves aren't what is important. It's when it is used. It's often used as a response when you ask people there why they don't have a job, why they can't succeed in life, why their family is starving, why they abandon their family. It's typically a response that you hear when you ask those questions. It's, well, I'm Haitian. It's just the way I am. It's the way that life has it's the only thing life gives me to do. It's after a lot of cultural research, not done by me, but by other authors, it's become clear that it's in large part because Haiti has received so much support from other nonprofit organizations and other nations that have just infiltrated it with different resources, yet not paying attention to the strategy for how that affects this culture of dependency. So thankfully, the organization I was with had a very unique, very, very detailed strategy for addressing that and providing good to the communities while accounting for the cultural dynamics at play. But that being said, that was an eye-opening experience for me because I realized that there were very complex dimensions shaping people's behavior. And it wasn't random, and it was understandable by looking a little deeper. So at that point, I decided to study international business and wanted to take my research as far as I could. I would go on years later, when I started my doctoral program, to realize that those complex cultural dimensions also shape business interactions. So I ended up writing my dissertation on cross-cultural selling and how understanding those differences can be the difference between success or failure in a cross-cultural business exchange.
The dependency culture starts because of the constant ways to kind of make them feel that they're taken care of, and they do not have it in them to kind of get onto their own and like
Damn
kind
it.
of do things for themselves. And then that creates an entire cycle and a loop for generations. Like somebody has to break through it to kind of navigate and make a better life for themselves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The point of that whole scenario, or I guess the takeaway from that experience in Haiti years ago, I think that was back in 2013, was at that time in my life, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, if I wanted to go into business, if I wanted to be in sales, or if I wanted to do something philanthropic. Because I
Yeah.
really had a heart for what I was doing there in Haiti. But I realized after looking at that scenario, and there was another moment during that summer too. We would go, we would take a bus to different parts of the island frequently. And many times we would pass this very large, what looked like a factory, but it was always empty and looked abandoned. Near the end of the
Ooh.
summer, I asked one of the translators what that was. And he said it was a water bottle factory. And I said, well, why isn't anybody there? He said, well, plenty of people in the community. In fact, some of my friends and family used to work there. But after the earthquake, I think the earthquake in 2010, 2011, there
Yeah.
was a massive surplus of free water that literally flooded the country from different NGOs around the world, and it was so excessive that years later there was still a surplus of this free water, which sounds good on the surface. It had actually caused thousands of people that worked in that factory to lose their jobs and be unable to provide for their families and be perpetually dependent on additional support. So it was another
Yeah.
example of those
Yes.
types of challenges. But the point is, at the end of that summer, I realized it didn't matter what I chose to do with my life. If I didn't, as so long as it was going to be related to culture or something international, I realized that if I didn't understand culture, that I could end up causing significantly more harm than good.
Yeah.
So it became a priority for me to try to understand exactly what was happening behind the scenes in different cultures. And eventually that led to, after building a career in professional selling, led to an interest in understanding, okay, how can culture affect sales dynamics? And I ultimately wrote my dissertation I published it in 2022 about cross-culturally adaptive selling methods and how to account for some of these complex forces that shape human behavior to become more successful in your business interactions.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I wanted to add, I think one of the things that you are talking about is like communal responsibility. Like there is a difference between, and I know I was coming in and out of the station, that even though you may want to go in and help a new community, a new culture, a new country, people, there might still be some elements that you have to take into consideration, like respecting the culture, respecting the
Yes.
people, recognizing their flow of things before you insert your need to help and support and improve their lives, right? And I think that I'm definitely resonating more with that because I've seen foreigners come to Sri Lanka, offer their support, but they don't understand anything about what it means to be a Lankan, and poverty looks different in every country.
Yes.
And so poverty in Sri
Yeah,
Lanka looks significantly different. So someone coming in and saying like, here's all this support and money or whatever, here's what we want you to do. And then it collapses the moment they disappear because the culture couldn't really incorporate that support in a way that was sustainable and long term. So I think that's also another thing that I was noticing from what you were sharing.
certainly. And on that note, outside of the more technical academic dimensions, which we can get to in a little bit in this conversation, which they're
Yeah.
always fun to talk about, there are two life-changing books that resonate with what you just said, Nishani. It's called When Helping Hurts,
Ooh. Okay.
and the other is called The Locust Effect. Those two books, for anybody who's interested in either culture itself or doing something philanthropic,
Yeah.
doing something internationally, they really do a wonderful job. They're bestsellers, but they do a wonderful job of illustrating how good intentions paired with bad information or bad understanding of culture can produce very, very bad outcomes, but having a good understanding of culture with good intentions can produce very, very good outcomes.
Exactly.
So it's definitely
Definitely.
definitely something important
Yeah.
to keep in mind. But that brings us kind of to one of the biggest issues, which is what do we do about it? Because we all come
Yes.
from different cultural backgrounds and we all have our own cultural makeup, whether or not we've been able to identify it or understand why we do some of the things we do, why we act the way we do, or want what we want, communicate how we communicate.
Yeah.
It begs the question, what do we what do we do about it? Especially considering we're on a call now. We represent three very diverse cultural backgrounds
Sure.
that's not just
Yes.
comprised of our own, the individual country we came from, but
Right.
also the other exposures we've had, the nurture,
Yes.
as well as our own unique personality types, because the people are different across even one specific culture. So it's an important question. There's not a very straightforward and easy answer for it.
Mm.
But I would say, at the very least, if you're interested in it, one thing you can do is study it in depth,
Mm.
research things such as Fed's dimensions, Trumpanar's dimensions, the Globe Project. But I would also suggest that's probably not for everybody. In fact, it's probably just for a very few people who are uniquely compelled by it, like myself. Just happened to be very interested in that, so it
Yeah.
was a joy for me to study it. But what I did find through my dissertation research and through just a lot of life experiences that there are some general things that everybody can do to make cross-cultural relationships just a little bit better. And it all starts with empathy.
Mm.
Yes.
Yeah.
But the critical part about empathy, though, is that it doesn't just happen by trying to imagine yourself in someone else's shoes. You first have to
No.
understand yourself
Yeah.
and recognize that you see things from a very distinct way.
Mm.
It's
Yes.
natural to you, and it's natural to imagine or believe that everyone else sees things exactly as you do.
Right.
But
Yeah.
it's just not the case. So pausing for a moment and reflecting on your own influences and questioning them and realizing,
Yes.
okay, this is just me, allows you to then have a little bit more mental or emotional room to
Yes.
validate someone else's experiences, which could be completely different from your own.
Yeah.
That's kind of the first step. The second that I found through my research, especially when it came to cross-cultural selling,
Mm.
was demonstrating earnestness regardless of
Mm.
what culture. You demonstrate in earnestness to adapt to someone else's culture, to understand their culture, even if you don't get it right.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's to open doors, open tremendous doors, and help people or cause people to have empathy for you
Yes.
and
Yes.
feel like you care. It's a great way to smooth the process and
Yeah.
up to understanding one another. So a good example of that here in Argentina, one of the most important things if you're going to come visit is to try their local drink called mate.
Oh.
Oh.
And even if you don't really like it, to say, "Oh no, this is awesome, thank you," to reach for it when they try to pass it around the group. It's just a simple example,
Yeah.
but those types
Right.
of things go a long way.
Yeah.
So demonstrating earnestness,
Oh my gosh.
and then
Yes.
I would
really
just
communicate.
add one small thing to that is when people are trying to engage in your culture, give them the space, tell them what it is. They're coming with an open heart and welcome them. It's equal effort on both sides, I'm going to say. And
True.
I'm saying that because everybody is intrigued. Why and where does it come from? Tell them the origins. They're willing to learn. Nobody is just doing it for fancy. So it's just a two-way street. Just know that always.
Certainly.
In fact,
Yeah.
during our previous episode, Gigi specifically talked about what it means to be a guest in someone else's home. And
Yeah.
we come from a culture where the guest is like the special person that's in the home, and you treat them as if they're kings and queens of, because they're visitors, they're coming from wherever, and you're welcoming them into your home. But her perspective was,
Mhm.
well, if you're walking into someone else's home, you need to recognize that it is not your comfort zone, that it needs to be you being more humble and open to the idea of learning and absorbing things rather than inserting your own beliefs and your own expectations and your whatever it is that you have, and you're inserting that onto these people, onto the persons that you're meeting or the cultures that you're a part of. Kind of like your example,
Yeah.
Dr. Zachary, right? Like you're in Argentina
Yes.
and you may not love this welcome drink, but if you're in the group, right, the flavor may not be preferred, but you are respectful of the community and you're like, okay, you are
Yeah.
inviting me in and saying, we trust you enough to share something unique and special with you. Let's see how you experience that. And I definitely have had moments where my parents have been like, even if you hate the food, even if the food sucks, and they did not make it well, and there's not enough salt or whatever, does not matter. You're going to just appreciate the fact that they took time out of their lives to make something for you. And food is a natural way for me to share my culture, especially because there's not a lot of Sri Lankan stuff happening in the United States. There's a very small community of Sri Lankans in the US, just like there's a small community of Americans, North Americans who travel across the globe. And so I've had to learn how to incorporate what my culture has taught me, and that is mainly through food. And so when I share it, I've had people, over the years, I've had people share like, whoa, this is intense. And like, it's not always been received really well by others, but I've realized that's another cultural piece that I was raised and taught to uphold is always make sure that you have, as you phrased, empathy, right? Because you need to recognize that not everybody has had the walk of life that you've had and that it's okay. You do not need to have had this other person's walk of life to truly understand and accept them, but you can make space for that and to be like, okay, this is what it is. So that responsibility, I think, is another piece I think we're all just kind of touching on right now. Like, recognize that you don't just walk into someone's house and go, okay, I want this couch moved. I want to sleep over here. I want this for breakfast, this for dinner. You do not go around barking orders. You are more humble, you have humility, and you are opening up yourself to the possibility of new experiences, which is scary. I think that's why we place these rules and, some people end up barking orders. But yeah, I'm curious how you guys receive that. Dr. Zachary, what do you think?
Well, I think that's a particularly valuable message for North Americans because as fate would have it, we think many North Americans are somewhat blind to the presence of cultural differences around the world. We tend to think that the rest of the world sees things exactly as we do. But the great irony is that we are actually, meaning North Americans, are one of the most unusual cultures on the face of the planet, particularly because of our extreme degree of individualism compared to many other places in the world. That's a very long conversation just to get into that one dimension.
Yes.
It shapes everything, everything from how we view our purpose in life. We need to pick ourselves up from our own bootstraps, define our own hopes and dreams. And we talked a little bit about this last week, Nishani, that there's good and bad to every one of these dimensions. When it comes to individualism versus collectivism, that scale, being high on the individualism spectrum means that as a North American, we have the benefit of being taught from a very young age that we can be and do anything we want to be. It's ingrained into our culture, regardless of what socioeconomic background you come from, what demographic, what gender, what else. Our society teaches that at the cultural level. But at the same time, while that's a great thing, the U.S. is also one of those sad places where, as people age, once they lose their utility, their social utility, even if they were good parents, they're often put into nursing homes, left alone to, not to be too harsh, but to rot. And it's a sad reality where you can have positive and negative results of different culture. The point of this conversation isn't getting into whether or not that should be or how to fix it or adjust it, which that's another conversation. But the point is, this is just one dimension out of probably about 30 that have been identified by very renowned researchers who have done extensive cross-cultural research to identify what these underlying forces are that shape human behavior. This is just one of them. And if you just look at this one as a North American, you can realize that we're very different. So we should have a great sense of caution and humility when we travel or interact with people from different cultures, because the ways of viewing life are very, very different. So back to those three things that can be done to adapt for cultures, regardless of where you're from. I would say the biggest takeaway, aside from learning all these dimensions and how to account for them individually, empathy by researching what it means to be from the U.S. If you're from the U.S., study U.S. culture, so at the very least you understand what your influences are. Once you know how distinct you are, it's easier to conceptualize that people are different, right? So if you want to understand, you want to have empathy for others, understand yourself. The second, again, demonstrating earnestness. So when you go abroad, recognize that people don't don't do things the same, and try to find what those things are.
Yeah.
And even if you screw it up, it's going to be endearing to those around you.
Yeah.
It's going to help with your
Yeah.
communication, your relationships, your business exchanges.
Yes.
And then the third helpful takeaway at the global level is communication. Over
Yep.
communicate. Um, don't assume that people understand what it is you're saying, because there are complex cultural forces that affect everything from how much body language and eye contact is appropriate or
Yeah.
required in a context
Yeah.
to
Mm-hmm.
communicate something, to inflection, tone of voice, and how literal the words themselves should be interpreted.
Yes. Yes.
Does
Yep.
the exact words I'm saying dictate what it is I'm trying to communicate? Or is it more about the implications of what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
There
Yeah.
are cultures where the intent to save face or to not hurt somebody's feelings can
Mhm.
make it socially acceptable to use words that literally taken mean something completely different from what is intended
Yeah.
to be communicated. So don't take anything at face value in communication. Those are kind of uh, the three highlights to bring up for anybody who's starting out trying to have a little bit more cultural understanding.
So, as Dr. Zachary said, the last bit is communication. And I'm very
Yes.
guilty, but I'm very happy because I usually end up over communicating a lot because I always have this feeling that the other person doesn't understand me. The last thing that you also added, the way the words are interpreted.
Mhm.
Honestly, I'm going to say I am very careful when I use my words here because it's pretty easy because this country is like very driven with English as the first language. And
Yeah.
obviously, English is not my first language. And we don't come with bad intent when we are trying to say something. But honestly, like sometimes I like when I'm given the space. And when you travel, you realize the same words and the same phrasing could mean something else somewhere else. When you end up meeting people who you have no idea about their culture, what is the first thing that probably you would do to make them feel safe, heard, and be okay with who they are?
I mean, that's a wonderful question. I think I'd have two answers to that. One would be if you're really trying to adapt to their culture and you have a little bit of time to prepare.
Mm-hmm.
If you're interested in cultural research, a fun way to do that would be to go to hofstadinsights.com. And
Ooh.
there's a tool so one of the foremost cultural researchers, his name is Geert Hofstede. In the
Okay.
80s, he did an extensive study of IBM employees, and IBM's a global country. So having
Yeah.
access to IBM employees to do these surveys
Yeah.
allowed him to identify 5 of the most prominent, well-studied cultural dimensions that shape behavior. One of which is individualism versus collectivism. Just going back to that dimension we mentioned a few minutes ago. I won't go into all of them, but it's a great way to try to understand somebody a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's not going to give you all the answers. It's not going to dictate whether or not you should turn your head, 45 degrees to the left when you smile, or should you say this word or that word. But at the very least,
Oh.
it's going to inspire some curiosity and perhaps give you
Yes.
some
Yes.
organic inspiration for how to better connect with them. Maybe one of the things that's helpful to do is if you go to that site and you look up your country versus their country, you can compare them in side by side in the tool, which is kind of nice. Look for the
Oh,
biggest
nice.
disparities. A good
Huh.
example would be if you put Argentina and the US into that tool,
Yeah.
you'll find that uncertainty avoidance is one of the biggest disparities. Uncertainty
Mm.
avoidance, as another example, is the extent to which people are willing to accept risk in their daily life.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
We
Mhm.
are very low on uncertainty avoidance. We don't avoid risk, we embrace it for the most part.
Yeah.
We have
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
pioneering culture where we'll invest
Yes.
into things that are new and different and we want to
Yes.
grow and expand. It's led to expansions of industries and new inventions. Whereas
Yep.
in Argentina, they have a very high uncertainty avoidance where
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
they've experienced so much instability as a culture from all the economic collapses and things like that, that aversion to uncertainty is built into everyday life to the extreme. When you sign up for a gym membership, for instance,
Yes.
they want everything shy of a blood sample and a commitment for the next 2 years that you're going to do anything but not pay them.
Yeah.
It's just another example. But if you look in that tool, you could see those disparities and see if something is extreme like that, maybe it can
Mm-hmm.
lead
Yeah.
to some food for thought. Separately, though, if you don't have time to do that, or you're just meeting somebody,
Yeah.
one of the most practical things you can do, regardless of what culture you're from or they're from, is ask questions. Asking
Yeah.
questions is
Yes.
one of the fastest ways to have somebody feel comfortable with you
Mm-hmm.
and
Yes.
open the door to deeper connection, because people
Yeah.
love talking about themselves. It doesn't matter what culture you're from.
Yeah.
Everyone loves talking
Yeah.
about themselves. Um, Take an interest in them, ask them questions about where they're from and what their
Right.
culture is. And that's going to open the door for empathy. And perhaps, depending on their personality, maybe they'll ask questions about you, and you can start to develop some organic understanding of the things that are most important to them. Because what it is they bring up,
Mhm.
probably
Yeah.
the areas, if, for instance, if they're interacting with somebody from the US, oftentimes
Yeah.
there's this perception that people in the US are brash or arrogant, or maybe a little harsh in their words. Well,
Yes.
if you're a North American asking somebody, for instance, from India, from Sri Lanka, that question, based
Mhm.
on their experiences, if they've had those experiences in the past with North Americans, their response to you might be somewhat shaded or colored by their past experiences, and perhaps give you
Exactly.
the opportunity to demonstrate that there are still Americans that truly care and
Yeah.
aren't wanting to offend you. It's just
Yeah.
a good, uh, uh, quick tip, I suppose.
You kept adding on to it, and I was like, do not say what I think you're going to say. And it was the question that was going to be that has been my approach, is asking a ton of questions. I just go
Yeah.
on, I'm like, what about this? Tell me about this. Tell me more about that. And you're right.
Mhm.
It makes people feel like what they have to say matters.
Matters.
And the more questions you ask, and of course, you need to be an active listener. You can't just ask the question and jump to the next question and not even acknowledge what they just
Yeah.
said or try to incorporate it into your thought of understanding. So that's definitely been my experience. I also love to be like, tell me more about your food. I'm a big lover of food. I can eat every day, all day, at all times, and talk about it at all times. So I'm
Yeah.
always asking specifically, like, talk to me about your favorite dish, right? Tell me what's
Yeah.
your favorite thing to eat when you're not feeling good. Like, how do you spend your
Mm-hmm.
days with like comfort food? Because there's American comfort food, and then there's Sri Lankan comfort food, and there's Indian comfort food. Like, there is
Yeah.
so many different versions of it. So that's definitely been my experience. And
Mhm.
with that, I wanted to jump into a little topic, because I know Dr. Zachary has, at this point, already is consistently running a social group, or I would love for you to explain and expand on that. In
Yeah.
Argentina, he started bringing together other individuals from diverse communities that are traveling through Argentina, essentially, or probably even locals. And he's been introducing this idea of like, how do we build cultural understanding, adapting together, and building a community when we're all from different parts of the world, and that empathy piece, right? Making empathy accessible to everybody. I think
Yeah.
that's one of your key takeaways here from this conversation, Dr. Zachary, is that you really advocate for that, for the element of empathy.
Yeah.
So I want you to tell our listeners about what you're doing in Argentina and what that's been like for you, because I was really interested in that when I heard about it, and I've seen pictures of your work on Instagram, posts about it, and I'm like, damn, this is such a brilliant idea. So please tell us more about what that means to you and what that's been like.
Thank you so much for bringing that up. I've realized, through the years, as I've gotten deeper into cultural studies and traveled more, that there is not it's not possible to say that one culture is better or worse than another. I think
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
cultural humility is the key to better understanding, recognizing that people see things and do things very differently depending on where they're from in the world, and they're all equally valid ways of viewing reality, equal and
Yeah.
valid ways of behaving. And one of the things that I realized after I moved here to Buenos Aires was that, thankfully, it's a very popular destination for world travelers, digital
Mm.
nomads
Ye-
from all over the world. So I started meeting some of these people at different meetup groups and thinking
Mm-hmm.
perhaps it'd be great to put together my own event that
Yeah.
would specifically foster conversations related to culture and help people empathize with people from other cultures by just
Yeah.
asking questions and opening up the dialogue. And thankfully, there's been a lot of interest in it. People are very curious and want to
Yeah.
learn about cultures, which
Yeah.
I'm excited. because I think it's not something people are often exposed to, but there are plenty of people that once they're exposed to this reality that people are so different, there's plenty that are very intrigued by it. So I'm encouraged by the fact that this is going to be posted. I think there will be some people that hopefully hear this podcast and are curious
Yeah.
to learn more.
Yeah. Or
That being
even
said,
start
that's
their own.
Yes, exactly. Like get into your communities. Like we all at the end of it, as we all mentioned before, we all want to be seen and heard. And
Yeah.
it can be in any shape and format. And first thing to be seen and heard is just give everybody this space to express where they come from. I think once you let go of a little bit of that part, you're going to only see beautiful people behind that door. Like everybody is guarded is because they're really scared to tell people who they are. Once they let go, everybody has this, like, though we come from different places, like three of us are from three different countries, experienced three different childhoods. At the end of it, we still want the same thing, which is I respect your culture, you respect mine. You know where I come from and I share your food, you share my food. Like at the end of it, we still are looking at the same thing. We all still want to sit at the same table, experience the same things. What brings us all together? I think with all of your conversations, there's a lot that I was thinking about, and you have shifted and given me a perspective. So I feel really different, but thank you so much for giving us a perspective to understand what it feels when, somebody comes to your place. Like, how can you make space for them?
Yeah. And, with that, I believe, Dr. Zachary, you also just recently started a YouTube channel called Cultura Americana. And we've been tuning into the videos and giving some feedback whenever Dr. Zachary shared and asked us for some feedback. And having watched your first video, you captured so many conversations. I believe that was another reason why I was like, Gigi, we have to have Dr. Zachary on this podcast. I've already had so many conversations about culture with him, just because we are both from different cultures and we've just kind of learned more about each other through these conversations. And then to see that he has now started the YouTube channel and you're walking the walk, right? You're not just talking about the experience, you're also walking the walk. You moved out of the US, you moved into a new country. Now you're a bold risk taker where you started a whole new community project. And you're like, you know what? I'm just going to go out there and do it. And we're not saying that everybody needs to do the exact same things that we have done, but just to realize that if you've ever wondered, somebody's already doing that. You just got to find a way to find them. Like if that's a Google search, and I think you mentioned Meetup, that's also another platform that I used when I first moved to new cities. It's helped significantly because it's relatively more challenging to make friends as adults sometimes, especially when you're somewhere new and there's cultural barriers and there's a lot of details when you're traveling, right? So there are people like Dr. Zachary who may be a risk taker, bold mover, and like moves out of the country, starts somewhere new, and then he's like, you know what, I'm gonna make it a comfort zone for other people to come together, other transplants and digital nomads to come together and create our own bubble where we're kind of joining hands and teaching each other and learning and absorbing each other's experiences in life without judgment, just being open to the idea of learning something new, right? And thank you so much for the book recommendations. I have like 3 different books now that I'm like, whoa, I didn't even know that these topics were explored in more depth, I would imagine, through authors who probably have studied these extensively, right? Again, we're talking about lived experience. This is why I knew you would be a fantastic guest, because you bring in that research culture piece where it's on a book, like writing something on a book and having to define things, put a label on something and say, this is what it is. I think that's really invaluable to our listeners. To me personally, I can't wait to some of the books that you reference, I'm like, I cannot wait to start actually looking that up, because I'm like, ooh, I wonder what they get into. I wonder all the things that come up in these books. So anyways, I did want to have you share a little bit more about your intentions with your YouTube channel, because I'm sure our listeners would love to follow you there. And we're going to add all of this information on our captions, on our show notes, so that you guys can access Dr. Zachary and his channels and get in contact with him if you guys are interested. And also, if you're traveling to Argentina, in Buenos Aires, maybe you might find yourself in his group and joining on the social conversations. You never know, right? So anyways, yes, please, Dr. Zachary, tell us a little bit more about the channel, and then we'll wrap up.
Definitely. Well, I appreciate it. And one of the frustrating things about a conversation like this is that it brings up the surface level of so many things,
Yeah.
and we don't have time to
Yes.
go to any of these really fascinating subtopics.
Yes.
But that's the motivation for the channel, is that
Mm.
I've realized that there is a strong desire for this type of information, both
Okay.
in Buenos Aires and back in the US. And I think there's a need for it globally. There's a need for
Yes.
this type of cultural understanding to be made a little
Mm.
bit more accessible, a little bit more
Yeah.
palatable,
Yeah.
transitioning it, or translating it rather, from the theoretical and academic to the practical.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that's the reason. The second reason is that there's really an endless amount of these topics to get into, and they're very
Mm-hmm.
fun. For example, everything from, again, individualism versus collectivism, that's clear.
Yeah.
Uncertainty avoidance, which I explained a little bit ago. Universalism versus particularism, the extent to
Mm.
which mean the literal words that they say versus not, or that the rules
Yeah.
apply in all circumstances, or there can be exceptions made.
Mm-hmm.
A high
Yes.
context versus low context
Yeah.
communication. How much body language is necessary? Achievement
Yeah.
versus ascription. How much someone finds their value based on the community they're from versus
Mm.
what they achieve in life. And the
Yeah.
list goes on and on and on.
Yeah.
Again, there's probably 30 of these dimensions that shape
Whoa.
and affect so many
Yeah.
different things. That's if you look at them all individually. But then if you
Mm-hmm.
Right.
start finding the influences of multiple dimensions, multiple measures across a culture, the chemistry gets extreme. The point is, people are way too complex to compartmentalize.
Yeah.
It's important that we can't, it's important to note that we can't
No.
perfectly understand any culture, but we can sure have a lot of fun trying.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
along the way, we develop a deep sense of empathy and some more practical skills for adapting and ultimately improving our cross-cultural relationships, regardless
Yeah.
of where we're from or where we're going. That's the
Yeah.
purpose of the
Whoa, mic drop. I mean, you touched on so many different subtopics, and you were so right. I mean, as we were diving into the topic, I kept looking at the time. I'm like, darn, I can't dive into that in more detail because now we need to keep it moving because and again, this is why the topic of culture is yeah, it's an infinity loop. I feel like we
Yeah.
could just keep on going for hours, but in the interest of everybody's time and also our special guest's time, I just wanted to say thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. Thank you for adding so much more knowledge and information that Gigi
Yeah.
and I were even. I'm like taking down notes over here. I'm like, whoa, I gotta remember that one. I gotta remember this part because I want to revisit that in a conversation with you when
Definitely.
we touch back again in our next check-in. So
Uh,
thank you, Dr. Zachary. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being a part of the conversation. Thank you for what you're doing in the communities where you are traveling to, and the communities that you're bringing together. Because I think the key takeaway that I'm going to remember is that you're talking about empathy, and I know that that word gets used a lot, but it's not often understood. And you broke it down so well in this podcast episode. And I hope that that's what our listeners also took from this, among other various details that we jumped into. So, with that being said, if you made it this far, thanks for hanging out with us. We hope it made you feel a little bit more seen. This is, if I'm being honest, we're not promising perfection, but we're showing up as we are. Until next time.
Stay real, stay honest.